More than 40% of children under 18 are not in school, and they live in Sub-Saharan Africa. According to the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, data shows that 244 million children and youth between the ages of 6 and 18 worldwide are still out of school.
The new UNESCO data highlights the top 4 African countries with children out of school, with Nigeria leading with 20.2 million, Ethiopia at 10.5 million, the Democratic Republic of Congo at 5.9 million, and Kenya at 1.8 million. UNESCO notes that more girls are out of schools than boys. According to the international institution, more than 40 million children did not go to school in 2000. With UNESCO's help, 90% of countries have now set national benchmarks to assess progress towards quality education for all by 2030, including out-of-school rates. UNESCO calls for collective mobilization to ensure that the right of every child to access quality education is respected.
Well, for some reflection on what these numbers mean, we're now joined by UNICEF's Global Director of Education, Robert Jenkins. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. These numbers are staggering, unbelievable actually. And I want to split it up before and after COVID, because we know that COVID was quite a disruptor in many respects. So let's start before COVID. Did we still have this problem to deal with?
Well, thanks for having me. And indeed, that's why this is particularly worrying, because that nearly 250 million children worldwide that are not in school is actually a pre-COVID number. Wow. We don't yet have the global total of the children affected post-pandemic, but it's indeed very worrying. And we think that number will actually go up due to the impact of the pandemic on school systems.
All right. So Sub-Saharan Africa, what have been the predominant causes for this high number of children missing out on school?
Well, there's a number of reasons why children are not in school. There's demand side barriers and supply side barriers. On the demand side, it's marginalized children that struggle the most to stay in school, either due to poverty, they face gender-related barriers. Adolescent girls often face barriers to continue to attend school across the continent, but also globally. Children with disabilities, children living in remote locations. And then on the supply side, we all know that there are large classrooms. The quality continues to be a real concern. So even those children who are able to come to school often also have struggles with learning. So with the impact of the pandemic, now more than ever important for us to collectively work together, reopen schools, enable kids to catch up and be successful.
All right. I mean, it sounds simple when you put it like that, but I suppose it's almost like climbing a mountain, given where we're coming from, and also that countries across the continent are differently abled. How do we start climbing that mountain?
So there's a simple framework called RAPID, R-A-P-I-D, that helps us think this through. The R stands for reaching every child and enable them to retain them in school. So that's understanding each individual child's needs and work together at household, community, country, globally to enable. A, as they come back into school, assess their learning levels. For exactly the reason you've just mentioned, different children have learned in different ways, have different learning levels, particularly after the pandemic. Some kids have been out of school for an extended period of time, some more than 2 years. So we need to understand what is their learning level and enable them to catch up. P is to prioritize teaching the fundamentals. I is let's increase catch-up programs so that kids are able to bridge where they are in their learning with their age, because that has increased in the last 2 years, mostly because of the pandemic. And lastly, critically important, we need to develop broader support of psychosocial support, mental health needs, nutritional needs. It's been a trying 2 years for kids, I think, as we all know, and schools need to welcome them back with a full range of support.
I know that a lot of nations have tried to come in line in terms of benchmarking is it for 2030? What does this do? How does this help our countries move forward?
Well, we think part of the solution is definitely to set these benchmarks, set these targets, and be very aspirational. We should enable every child to realize their right to education. We should set targets for that, and we make promises and then hold each other accountable to do all we can to ensure that that actually happens. I mean, let's recognize out-of-school children are by far the most vulnerable and marginalized children in society. If you're out of school for prolonged periods, it also not only on your own learning, but has knock-on effects to you're more vulnerable to child labor, to early marriage, to increased rates of violence. So indeed, it is critically important that we set targets, hold ourselves accountable to do all we can, and ensure children realize their right to education.
The girl child remains particularly vulnerable. Are there any reasons that you found for that?
There are a number of reasons. So there's some good news. In the last couple of decades, say the last 20 years, there's actually been a narrowing in the gap between boys and girls on enrollment rates, particularly at primary level. But then if you're looking at adolescent girls, as we move into secondary school, you'll see a drop-off, very significant drop-off. And definitely there's a difference between girls and boys at older ages on percentage that finish secondary school and also acquire skills to transition to life and work. So barriers, gender-related barriers, fears of violence to and from school, and school gender-based violence within schools is a very real challenge in many countries. We still are plagued by early marriage, by early young pregnancies. So what's key is that we provide girls and boys but differentiated support to ensure that they overcome these barriers. And it's not only for themselves, but that will enable them to contribute to their households, to their families, to their communities, and to the countries. Critically important, particularly at this challenging time. We need all hands on deck so that all can contribute to their respective countries to the maximum.
I know that you can't tell governments what to do, but is there a way to advise them? Because sometimes countries do have budgets, but we find that they might not be spending them the right way.
So we work with UNICEF and other agencies, UNESCO and the World Bank and other key partners work hand in glove with governments at all levels, at the national level, but also right down to communities, to indeed just this, to ensure that we maximize the use of every dollar so it is the most effective to enable children to come to school and also to learn. So I also find what's very exciting is we have some great examples in some countries of at-scale programs that have had a real difference on bridging children back in school and accelerated their learning. So we at UNICEF, but also in other agencies, we share these best practices. We have countries meet each other and explain what can be done. We have school systems within countries and schools within countries share best practices, all driven by the mission, if you'd like, of ensuring every child is back in school, learning, and ultimately realizing their right to education.
All right. When we talk about solutions, could the way that education is delivered change the game for our children? I'm thinking maybe, online solutions, whatever.
It sure can. And so we need urgent action right now. We have a global learning crisis. We have millions of children out of school. We need action immediately. But it needs to be done in a way that transforms education systems that can meet sort of, if you'd like, the demands of today, which are increasingly complex. Kids need a greater range of skills. So we do also need to deliver education systems in a different way. One thing we learned over the last couple of years, particularly with the disruption of the pandemic, is there's a whole bunch of new and exciting tools, whether it's online, world-class digital learning tools, but also leveraging the television, the radio, other dynamic ways to enable children to learn. So again, we're documenting these best practices. We want to bring the best digital tools to each and every child so that as the great equalizer, and the evidence is really exciting, but ultimately, what's absolutely critical is that we all collectively remain committed to reach every child. We recognize marginalized children were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic in the last 2 years. So laser focus on the most marginalized, bring the best tools we have globally, and realize their right to education.
Where are we, do you think, on this curve? Is it still an increasing problem, or do you think that maybe we've reached a point where we've stopped further bleeding and that maybe now it's working on reducing the numbers?
Globally, there's no question we are very worried about the global trends, meaning overall globally, the numbers are not good. We are increasingly falling behind from the ambitious targets of reaching those targets of 2030 that you mentioned, of every child back in school and learning. So globally, the situation is very worrying. I guess the good news is we do have some incredible examples of countries working at scale, reaching large numbers of children, enabling them to catch up back in school and recover from this very challenging time. So big picture, very worrying. We've got great examples of what can be done. The key now is to take those across the world to all countries. So indeed, right back to every child, particularly marginalized children, comes back into school, accelerates their learning to catch up.
All right, and have we got simple blueprints on the continent in Africa that can be duplicated in other countries quite simply?
We do. And there's really, and again, it's back to the RAPID framework. We've got great initiatives around the continent of proactively bridging children back in school. We've got communities mobilized to, back to the issue of adolescent girls, to find adolescent girls that struggled the last 2 years to continue their learning, to bridging them back into their school and regain their learning. We've got great tools, like there's a tool called the Learning Passport. It's a partnership between Microsoft and UNICEF. It's a world-class IT-enabled tool that is in a number of countries in Africa that is showing great promise on enabling children to accelerate. We've got other countries that have rolled out very ambitious school meal programs and other nutritional programs at school. So as children come back, they receive the nutritional support they need in order to be successful with their learning. So some great programs. And again, the key now is how do we replicate these in every country so every child can benefit?
That's where we're going to have to leave it. Thank you so much indeed for highlighting this issue, and let's hope that authorities across our continent will find a way to make sure that every child has the right and actually gets to experience it of education. Mr. Jenkins, thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
All right, that's a word from UNESCO. 244 million children aged between 6 and 18 are out of school, and more than 40% of that number are in Sub-Saharan Africa. This is not great news at all.